So I'm Linda from the Carlisle Council on Aging. Most of you know me. Glad you're all here. It's a rainy day here, but very hot in California. So welcome all to today's virtual tour of the Mitchell Caverns. And we have a wonderful guide, California State Park interpreter, Andrew Fitzpatrick, and he's going to take us on a virtual tour. And if you can hold your questions till the end of the tour, that would be great. I'll unmute you all since the chat function doesn't seem to be available for some reason. So I'll have Andrew take it away.
All right. Good afternoon, everybody. It's still morning in California, but afternoon on the East Coast. You said it's hot here, but last night between 2 and 4 in the morning, we had rain and thunder and lightning. We actually had a 1/4 inch of rain, which for us is a very big deal. It's been very, very dry out here. My name is Andrew Fitzpatrick, as Linda mentioned, and I am a state park employee out here at Providence Mountain State Recreation Area, AKA Mitchell Caverns. We have a cave system in this park that's rather famous, easy to get to, very dramatic, and it's set in the heart of Mojave Desert up on the side of the mountain. And I've been out here for 7.5 years, almost 8 years now. And the park was closed when I first got here. We've since reopened it, and we're back. It's a very unique place. It's very remote. And even though the caves are the center point of this park, the desert itself that surrounds it is as noteworthy, and it actually kind of informs and gives context to the cave. And I know you all are from a much wetter climate than me. Although truth be told, I am originally from Wisconsin, lived in Minnesota, and then moved out west. So I have experienced trees and lakes. But the desert's a very different landscape than what we're all used to. And I wanted to start with a PowerPoint, a quick one about the desert, because I think the desert has a real public relations problem. Everybody thinks the desert is a lifeless wasteland, and they also think caves are kind of a lifeless hole in the ground, and those two things are not true. I'm going to endeavor to prove it to you, and I'm going to share my screen now, and we're going to just do a primer of desert ecology, biodiversity, a little intro to Providence Mountains. So here we go. Oh, hold on, a little technical difficulty. Share screen, here we go, here we go. All right, how's that? Everybody can see it? Cool, that's the view looking north from one of the natural entrances to Mitchell Caverns. And it's one of my favorite views, one of the most iconic views of this park. And we are going to take a look here and learn a little bit about the desert. So when most people think of the desert, they think of this, or this, or this, right? Big, empty hinterlands, just dirt and rocks and sand, no plants, just nothing, lifeless. These are definitely deserts. These are parts of the desert. But the desert around here also looks like this. That's up the canyon behind me in the Providence Mountains. We got whole hillsides filled with cactus. It looks like a cactus garden. And we get snow. We are at 4,300 feet above sea level here. And in winter, we can get some big snowstorms. That, I think, was just this past MLK Day weekend, 2021. Shut the park down for 2 days. Felt a little bit like I was back in Minnesota. So we are in the Mojave Desert. There's a few deserts in the United States. The Mojave is kind of your classic, United States American desert. It's high desert. It's up on a plateau. There's lots of mountains between it. And this is where it's located. Here's Vegas up here. Los Angeles is down here. Here's Phoenix. And this area, mostly in the middle there, is the Mojave. And that is exactly right there, smack dab in the middle where Providence Mountain State Recreation Area is. So what creates a desert largely is what's called rain shadows, right? Here in California, our weather mostly comes from the west moving east. Storms laden with moisture, wet clouds come off the Pacific Ocean and they move east and then they hit those coast ranges. And those coast ranges are almost like wringing out the sponge of the cloud. They'll drop their rain or snow up on the peaks, and then we are left in the rain shadow. The really, really high part of the Sierra Nevada mountains in California are directly west of Death Valley, and there's a reason for that. That's the reason that is. Those really tall 14,000-foot peaks wring out the rain and leave Death Valley one of the driest places in the world. Quote from one of the favorite desert curmudgeons of America, Edward Abbey. He said, this is really important to keep in mind when we think about the desert. There is no shortage of water in the desert, but exactly the right amount. It might seem like there's not enough water for us, and in some senses there aren't. But for the animals and plants that live here, this is normal. Maybe not this year, this is a mega drought year, but dry conditions, hot temperatures, not much water is normal. The plants here, the animals here are prepared for that. And this is just some of the wildlife shots from this park. It's an actually very, very diverse place. We have too many animals for me to go through and name. But we have a lot, and it's never a dull day for wildlife. Some of our most famous species that we see a lot of are the wood rats, very common species, kind of the linchpin of the ecology in the cave. We'll talk about that when we get in there. We, of course, have a lot of coyotes, the desert soundtrack. We hear them very often, and they're quite an adapter. They can survive almost anywhere. Smart little pups. And our most iconic species, right? The desert tortoise, which is a species people are concerned about. Desert tortoises are amazing for many reasons. They've beat the desert by going underground, basically sleeping for 90% of their lives. They come out probably like today when there's a little bit of moisture, and then they head down into the burrows and they wait out the hot periods and the cold periods. A bit smarter than us, maybe. One other thing that makes mountains in the Mojave unique, including the mountains behind me, the Providence Mountains, is the concept of the sky island. You can get here on this schematic here, you can kind of see how this works. And I know you guys got a little bit of terrain in Massachusetts, but where I grew up in Wisconsin, it's pretty flat. You got some rolling hills, and it took me a while to get my head wrapped around the concept of elevation. The higher you go, the colder it gets. And usually with the rain shadow, it means more precipitation on mountains. And so the vegetation changes. And what happens, you can see here on this, right? No snow on the floor, snow in the mountains. What happens then is that plants and animals that can't survive the desert flats get stuck on these sky islands, especially as the ice age ended 10,000 years ago, and all of these pine trees, which had been able to survive at lower, cooler elevations, have had to retreat up the slopes of the mountain. And we have sky islands on the mountain, which makes it very interesting. It's very unique animal life and plant life here because some of these species are stuck up at higher elevations. If you were to be here in Mitchell Caverns to come on a real tour with me, we would be leaving from this historic home, which is Brian. I'm inside of it today. It's the Mitchell residence. Jack and Ida Mitchell ran this whole area, what is now the state park, as a Route 66 roadside attraction. They came up here during the Great Depression. and pioneered. They built all these buildings. There's about 4 or 5 stone buildings. They built them by hand. They built terraces. They piped water about a mile downhill. They were very busy, very tough people who did all this while they were in their 50s, and then ran this as a desert resort with cave tours until the mid-1950s when state parks took over. And just like Jack Mitchell's tours of the caves, we would meet on the porch here, and then we would head out on the cave trail. This is another view from a little brighter. I'm inside the bowels of this building, which was once the Mitchell home. And there's the view from our porch. We had a great light show last night when we had the lightning and thunder. It's a beautiful area, very unique buildings. When we leave for the caves, we got to talk about one thing, and I'm going to take the opportunity, even though you guys aren't physically going in the cave, to hammer in a point that we're trying to make regarding white nose syndrome. This is a fungus that is new to North American bats, but is very prevalent in Europe and Asia. It's a fungus that grows out of bats' noses while they hibernate. And that's a problem because a fungus growing out of your nose makes it difficult to sleep, particularly with how extreme bat hibernation is. Bats will lower their heartbeat while hibernating to just 2 or 3% of what they're going at when they're awake. That allows bats in colder climates to survive the winters. Most bats eat insects. They eat their weight or nearly their weight in insects nightly for many species, and they really need to store fat to get through the winter. And when they wake up in the middle of winter with a nose full of fungus and they fly around in distress, they have no food and they end up starving to death. It kills 90 to 100% of bats in the colonies it infects. It's being spread from cave to cave by bats themselves, but also the fungus has been hitchhiking on people's boots or gear. So we screen everybody before we go into the cave. We ask them if they've been in any caves recently. If they have, are they wearing anything from those caves? If they can change, we ask them to do that. If not, we have hydrogen peroxide or rubbing alcohol wipes, which we use to clean their gear or their clothes, their boots. The fungus is very, very tough. You really need a strong detergent to kill it. Most detergents available for commercial use for the public will not kill the spores of the fungus. So we want to keep it out of our cave, and we're really going the extra step. And that's something for y'all to keep in mind too. If you ever go visit old caves and mines, think about what you're wearing and never wear anything from one cave or mine or underground place into another. That's the new rule of thumb. Bats do us such a service with insect control that I think we should all go the extra step to try to protect them. I'm from Wisconsin. The state bird is the mosquito, and a small little brown bat can eat about 10,000 mosquitoes in one night. Per night, times millions of bats, you can see the value they have. I don't want to belabor that point, so if you want more information, whitenosesyndrome.org is very interesting. It's a little scary, but also hopeful. Worth checking out. So from the visitor center here to go to the caves, we would leave on our new cave trail, which is a route Jack and Ida Mitchell originally pioneered. We've done a lot of work on it, and I'm going to play a video that'll show us going much faster than we'd be able to move down the trail. Here we go. Is that coming through? No video? Yeah. Well, I'm going to let it play if anybody can see it. It's about a half mile to the cave. It's on the side of the mountain. The views are phenomenal. The setting for the cave is rather dramatic. And actually, I'm going to go back so you can see. You guys can see this. There's the cave. Everybody can see the cave entrance there. There's two. No, I guess the video's not working, huh? Oh, some people are getting it. Cool. The Chemehuevi people, the most recent native people to live in this area, they call this the Eyes of the Mountain. And it was a very important place for them. It's in some of their legends and salt songs, which is kind of a singable map they have for the Mojave Desert. And the eyes there of the mountain are, I've seen a few cave entrances in my day, but this is pretty dramatic. This is something like out of a movie or a comic book. And that's where we're going to go into Mitchell Caverns. While we go in, before we go in, we leave as many things as possible outside the cave. The same rationale for screening people and taking precautions for white nose syndrome exists for all sorts of other problems. When we go into the caves, we basically leave anything that doesn't fit in our pockets or that is a camera outside the cave. Because anything you bring in there is, if you leave it in there, it'll be in there forever. Caves are a giant time capsule. If a hair from your head falls off in the cave, it could be there literally for thousands of years. For some things, this is really cool. When it comes to Ice Age mammal bones, Native American artifacts, and deposits made by water in the cave, they will last forever, right? Stuff that outside of the cave would be gone very soon will last in there forever. Scientifically, that's incredible. It's not so cool when we find a chewing gum wrapper, right? Or lint. So we really minimize what we bring in there. We want to kind of keep it as pristine as possible. In this cave, we have two species found nowhere else in the world, what are called endemics. Our cave endemics are pretty unique. They're a tiny little Nyptis beetle. That's my finger for comparison for size. There it is close up. It's about 1/8 of an inch long. And it's so well adapted to living in the cave, it can't leave, right? It's stuck in there. Its eyes are now just tiny, 10% the size of other Nyptis beetle eyes. You can see its exoskeleton is kind of losing its pigmentation. This happens to animals that adapt to caves because why waste pigment on keeping ultraviolet radiation out when you can save that energy to survive in a very hostile place. We also have the little tiny pseudoscorpion. It looks like a tick with crab claws. It's even smaller than the Nyptis beetle. It's a hunter. It survives by hunting Nyptis and other tiny cave creatures. Whereas the Nyptis beetle itself, this guy, actually eats rat droppings and bat guano. That's right, the entire ecosystem in the cave revolves around fecal matter. So what we do to not crush these little guys is we always stay on the path in the cave. They're very rare. They only live in one section of the cave. And it's a pretty amazing feature to have. And they're so perfectly adapted to this alien world underground. That is my intro. I'm going to now switch to the virtual tour. We had a 3D photographer using technology with Matterport. He took 3D photographs multiple places in the caves. They're really high quality. This technology is generally used for selling real estate. It's now being used for like natural and cultural features that are enclosed. And it's pretty exciting. I'm going to share my screen now. And here we go. We're going to start the 3D tour here. All right, I'm going to go full screen. Boom, and you can see that there's also a link to this on our state park website. Can you guys see that? It's scrolling. Can you see me moving the cave? Yeah. Look at that. The future is here, huh? Technology is here. This is the desert from that cave entrance. Right, I'm going to spin around. There it is. There's the eyes of the mountain. There's a lot of evidence that people use this area, one of which is, look at that black staining on top of this entrance. That's from thousands of years of campfire smokes. And I think I know why, because when you enter this cave, it's in the mid 60s. And as you kind of hang out here, in the entranceway, you can feel it's like air conditioning. It's about 66-degree temperature air just slowly wafting at you. In the summer, it's delightful. In the winter, when it can be freezing or even below freezing, it's equally nice. It's warm. It's 65-degree warm air blowing at you when we go in the caves then. So I'm sure that feature made not only important and maybe sacred to Native people, but certainly made it a very comfortable place to be. And I'm just going to go back here and show you that we have these tags, right? We have these matter tags. Let me bring up one that's pretty, So we have these links. When you use this yourself, you'll be able to, we're moving around now. Let's see if this will work here. It brings up my picture. I'll be showing some of this to help illustrate the cave as we go. Can you guys see that owl? Everybody seeing the owl? No? All right, maybe that feature won't be working on these tours. I'm going to go back into the cave. I'm going to scroll back. Pretty incredible the way this thing moves. Can you guys see almost the animation as it moves, or is it kind of choppy? Choppy? Well, let's go inside. Let's get where everybody wants to go here. Don't worry, you all have a guide. You can see that on the left. You're going to be safe. I'll move a little bit slower here, so hopefully it doesn't get as choppy. No? Let me just pop into the main room. Here, it might be a little simpler. How's this? Just going to leave it for a second. Give me a thumbs up when you can see the interior of the cave. If you can. Okay, we're good? Coming through for some people? Sorry that some of this technology is a bit ahead of our connection here, but maybe Linda and I, we can share the links. You guys can use this program yourselves. It's really pretty easy to use, and I'm really impressed. I'm kind of a Luddite myself. It came out pretty good. So here we are inside the cave. Here is light from a natural entrance. That's the other eye, the one we can't enter. I'm going to go back to that main view here. Pardon me. There it is. Can you see the big stalactites all lit up? While it's kind of loading for you, these caves are very, very old. When I say it's a time capsule, it's not just a metaphor. Our caves are probably 10 to 15 million years old. And for a cave system, that's pretty old. Kentucky, Tennessee, the Appalachians have a lot of old limestone, what's called karst country. And there's so much water that caves only last a couple million years. Here, because of some unique features, one of which is probably the dryness, our caves have lasted like 5 or 6 times the average of caves. And the story of these nations in the cave, let's see if I can get a little closer here. I'm going to give you guys the good shot right there. Can you see all those stalactites in the column? No? Yeah? Well, if you have hard water at home, you already know how this forms. I don't know what Massachusetts is like, but out here in the desert, we got to use CLI on our faucets all the time, right? Water absorbs minerals because water is generally a little bit acidic. It holds the minerals in suspension, and then when it evaporates away, it leaves behind the calcium, the sodium, iron, things like that. The deposits you get on your shower head or your kitchen sink, if you let your kitchen sink drip water for 1 million years, a couple 100,000 years, this is what it would look like, right? That process, uninterrupted, if you didn't clean it off for 100,000 years, you too would have these formations. How's that looking? You get a little bit of cover, a little bit? Yeah, okay. I'm gonna just kind of scroll slower. I'm gonna get a close up here. So let's see if this will work. Can you guys see that photo? Everything's always updating. Okay. This gives you an idea. You can see those water droplets at the end of the soda straws or this helictite. That's what creates these caves. This cave is very, very dry, right? It's what they used to call it, a dead cave, and it's not dead, it's still kicking. By dead, they mean there's no longer water moving through and creating new formations, but that's not entirely true. It's not dead, it might be on life support, but we still have some growth of formations in the cave. And we're gonna look back toward that entrance. All right, there's where we came down the ladder. There's the daylight. There's 3 phases to create a cave. Step 1, this whole area underground had to get hollowed out. And that tends to happen when the water table is high and all these cracks in the limestone are just sitting filled with water for millennia, for millions of years. As they're sitting there and the water's moving through, a little bit of the sides of the cracks are being dissolved by the water, very, very slowly. But over time, these cracks become a big cave, right? A huge underground water-filled cavity, deep, deep below the surface of the earth. That's phase 1. Phase 2, the water table has to change. That generally happens as climate changes, or there's geology. Out here, we have basin and range geology. So the faults are all, the blocks of land, right? The plates are kind of all tilting over. And as that changes the elevation, the water table can drop and leave these cavities that were once filled with water, now just filled with air. However, that's phase 2, right? However, as the water seeps out, water is still dripping and passing through, right? And that's what creates all the stalactites, stalagmites, the 9 yards. It's that passage of water, dripping, splashing, evaporating, that creates all of these, what they call decorations in the cave. And I'm going to jump forward a little bit so we can see some of these up close. There's a really good spot up here. There we go. I'm just going to look up at these, and you guys want to give me a thumbs up when you can see what's called flowstone. Looks like a frozen waterfall, an icy waterfall, right? I know in Massachusetts, you guys get ice. This is, I've nicknamed this formation we're at right here the frozen waterfall. And that's kind of in essence what it is. This is no longer water dripping. It's sheets of water moving over the rocks and depositing the minerals as that happens. So in a sense, it is a frozen waterfall. It's just not frozen in ice. It's frozen in calcium carbonate. All of these cave formations are basically calcites, calcium carbonate, and very dramatic. And it's probably worth noting that this takes a lot of water to create these, right? This is not a slow dripping process. This would look like somebody left the kitchen sink running for hundreds of thousands of years. Pretty cool. Big, these are called drapes or curtains. Really, I'm gonna see if I can get a little closer to those. really deep. And some of these, they reach back a couple feet between the folds. Now, there's another good view. You guys savor that in. All right. I'm going to move up a little further. Bear with me here. I know I'm lagging a bit. And we're going to step down to this platform and we're going to look at our crown jewel. And it's kind of almost too lit here. If you guys can see my cursor, right in the middle is what's called a cave shield. And this looks, I know Minnesota had a lot of them, not really here in the desert, but if you've ever seen the shelf mushrooms that grow on the sides of trees, this looks uncannily like a shelf mushroom coming off the side of the cave. It's not a mushroom. It's called a cave shield. And what this is a horizontal crack, right? Horizontal crack that kind of moved like this, that water was coming out of with enough pressure to produce a fanning arc, right? Imagine your thumb over the garden hose, right? That kind of spray of water. That's apparently what happened here. And it happened for long enough with enough pressure deposited going out, right? Almost a little bit against gravity. It deposited going out. And that's a pretty big one. That one's about 2.5 feet across. It is very popular with people who love cave formations. It's kind of considered our crown jewel. All right, I'm going to turn around and we're going to leave the main room here. And we're going to go deeper into the bowels of the caves. It gets a little narrow through here, so we're going to have to go single file. And state parks, when they took over from the Mitchells, did some improvements to make this easier. But before state parks, if you were here on one of Jack Mitchell's more adventurous tours, this would have been blocked off right in front of us. And you'd have to crawl up here. You can see where the cursor is through this hole, and then down over here. Not many people made it past that squeeze. I should note that this is the route to the bottomless pit. Oh, I went too far. We'll go back a little bit. Right here is something rather sensitive cursor. All right, I'm going to pause here and let the lagging catch up. Right here is something pretty extraordinary. We have fossils set in the limestone. And give me a thumbs up if you can see the fossils when that photo loads. These are crinoids, which are about the width of the thickness of your finger, and they're protruding from the cave. And they're it's hard to get good pictures in a cave, but you can see the structures here, right? Good. It's coming in. It's a pretty dramatic fossil area, which are set throughout this area. It's the limestone. And I should maybe explain that, back up a little bit. The limestone we have here is very old. It's 300 million years old. And like a lot of limestones, maybe most limestones, it's the remains of a shallow ocean bed, right? 300 million years ago, all these ancient animals were living and dying and pooping and eating in the ocean, and all of that drifted down layer upon layer and built up these huge piles of sea mud. Eventually, with the processes of geology involving more sediment on top and then heat from the earth, so you kind of have a pressure cooking effect, all of this mud, which was filled with carbon and calcium, pressure cooked into a rock, right, into limestone. While it did that, most of the carbon was burned off or processed through, but the calcium remains in the rock. And that's why you get caves in limestone formations, because calcium is rather easy to dissolve with slightly acidic water. right? It's kind of think about what soda does to the human teeth, right? It takes a little bit of calcium off with that carbonic acid. And carbonic acid is just saying, you know, water that has carbon in it, right? Carbon dioxide in it. When rain passes through soil, it picks up carbon dioxide, becomes slightly carbonically acid, and then dissolves these cave formations. There's a lot of the fossils. Will just keep moving here. You can see it's narrow and dark through here. You probably can't see much. So I'm going to jump ahead to the bottomless pit. And let's see here. I'm going to try something. Oh, we went too far. We kind of overdid it with this bridge. But if you look down here, it's a deep hole, about 30, 40 feet. State parks now, we put lights in it. But before us, Jack Mitchell left it dark and there was no bridge here. And he would complete part of his bottomless pit tour here. And I actually, there's a segment from a podcast here. And I'm going to see if this will work for us because the sound effects are pretty good. And I think it probably sounds better than my Zoom connection. So give me a thumbs up if you can hear this as I play it, okay? Is that working for people? Can you hear that? No? Okay, I'm going to skip that then. The story about Jack Mitchell, this is a great time to talk about Jack Mitchell. Before this bridge, you just ended here and you could just see this black hole in front of you. And this really illustrates the character of Jack, this part of his tours. By this part of the tour, he's only using a road flare for light. And I gotta tell you, Jack Mitchell is a little bit like P.T. Barnum meets Teddy Roosevelt. He was a rough and tumble, do-it-yourself, never fire kind of guy. You know, he had that bully spirit of TR. And he was also a showman like P.T. Barnum, who didn't mind enhancing the truth to make a good story, right? So Jack, at this part of the tour, you're looking into what he calls the bottomless pit. He's using a road flare for only light, right? It's very dramatic. He tells you that this pit goes down thousands and thousands of feet. And he tells some crazy stories about it. And then he'd say, I'm going to prove it to you. And he'd throw the road flare, your only source of light, into the bottomless pit. And it would disappear. And this is like the grand finale of your tour. He just showed you one of the deepest holes in the world, goes miles, thousands of feet. And from this part, after he threw that in and everybody gasped in awe, you'd have to turn around and we'd go back the way we came, back out the way we came. Well, when state parks came in, took over from the Mitchells, they, of course, realized the bottomless pit's only 40 or 50 foot deep, and they had to take out hundreds and hundreds of road flares from the bottomless pit. Jack wanted to give you a good show, and he didn't mind changing things. One of the things that the original state park staff noticed was that the road flares had been doctored, right? They had been altered. Jack had been he'd been timing them to go out at a certain time. So when he knew they were about to go out, he could throw it in and make it appear to disappear in the darkness of the bottomless pit. Clever guy, great stories. Part of his spirit, I think, is still here at the park. And, you know, this grand finale was a great thing. This was a Route 66 roadside attraction. People would come here. They'd get a cave tour. They'd leave with this whopper, all these crazy stories. They, of course, went home, told them at the kitchen table or to neighbors. And that was a way for Jack to advertise, right? And leave people entertained. When state parks took over in 1969, we completed a goal of Jack's, a dream of Jack's. And the dream was to connect the two separate caverns that are Mitchell Caverns with the man-made tunnel in between. And state parks did that right here. You can see this airlock door. Mitchell Caverns is actually two separate cave systems that never touched naturally, that we've since connected with a man-made tunnel. That makes ease of transport on the tour really fun, really cool. However, when they did this in 1969, they didn't realize what they were doing. One of these caves has a south-facing entrance. One of these caves has a north-facing entrance. The cave we left behind, right, the one with the two eyes, it has there's never any direct sunlight into the cave. So it's much cooler and drier in that cave. Very little temperature change. The cave we're going to go into has a very, very small north-facing entrance, natural entrance, but it gets direct sunlight because it faces almost due south. And that little bit of direct sunlight makes that cave much warmer and much more prone to temperature fluctuations. Also more humid. So when they drilled this tunnel, they connected a warmer to a colder area and a high pressure area to a low pressure area. And what did that produce? It produced a wind tunnel. And they didn't realize it at the time. I'm going to kind of go slow here through this man-made mine tunnel. They actually created a wind tunnel that was changing the nature of the caves. And so they put two sets of airlock doors. And there we are. We're going to leave the second airlock door back into the north-facing cave called Tacopa Cave. And I'm just going to let this load for a second. How are we looking? Good. It's hard to see it from the angle of that, but when they were drilling out that man-made tunnel, they broke into a lot of mini caves. Hopefully that loads up kind of good. Can you guys see those mini cave formations? Yeah, these are like, this whole area is about a foot big. It's like a cave in miniature. Which also kind of highlights something. This cave system that we're in is rather compact. There's not a whole lot of little arms or legs to it. It's very, very small. Like you couldn't get lost in here if you tried. But as they drilled that tunnel between the two caves, they kept breaking into really small little mini caves. So what we think, and well, we kind of know, is that this limestone through here is honeycombed with caves that we'll really never see unless we would have a big rock slide or landslide or we drill into them. All right, this corner, I'm going to try to do a little tight. Oh, I think we made it. Oh, that's sometimes a tough part. Okay, going into the main room or the side room. Okay, going up the stairs. I'm going to pause up here, let you guys see all this. Hold on, let me go backwards a step. Yep, I guess that's about it. Okay. I'm gonna, not the best vantage point right here. I'm gonna pause right there, let that catch up. Can you guys see those stalactites? Yeah. Just take that in for a minute. So this is Tacopa Cave, and this room is called the Fallen Stalactite Room. And it's so named because of this massive stalactite here that fell off the ceiling up. There's these cameras don't really look directly up when they scan, but that stalactite fell right out of a hole here. You can still see where it fell off a long time ago, but a little closer here. And look at those curtains. One of the interesting things about this room is because it was so remote, you'll notice very few of the stalactites are broken. Unfortunately, many of the stalactites in that first big room we were in, many of those were broken by people over the years. But this one's in really good shape here. I'm going to load up one more photo here. This was from a couple of winters ago when we had, like the rest of California, it's kind of unusual now, we had a lot of precipitation. I mean, we had so much that the cave sprang to life again. You can see all the water dripping down here. All of these cave formations started growing again. Oh, I must have drawn on this. Oh, sorry, wrong way. All right, no, it's probably lagging a little bit, but we're about 2/3 of the way through. We're gonna have to step over some debris here. I'm just gonna let this catch up and you guys can see what the cave trail looks like. We step over this collapse pile. And then we got to go through a squeeze. This is the tightest squeeze in this cave, at least on the public tour. And it's about 18 inches by 3.5 feet. So you got to kind of tuck down and we got to go through there. All right. I'm going to step over here. This room's kind of dark, unfortunately. But we're going to stop here and take in some stuff. There, is that caught up? Good. So what we have here, center screen, is some cool stalactites, stalagmites, drapes, really interesting cave formations in here. And in the middle of it all is a wood rat nest. So wood rat is a polite way of, it's a better term for pack rats. They're so named because they just collect everything they can. Food, they'll bring in cactus spines to keep predators out. They'll collect shiny things and they stuff it behind all of these stalactites in this room. And we'll see them in there. The wood rats are often in this cave. It's very earthy smell in there. Oh, I'm sorry. Looks like I stopped the share screen. Let me try that again. Let's go back here. All right. This is an interesting chamber too, because it's very tight. Hard to really see much of that. But the floor in this room, if you stamp on it, it sounds hollow. You actually can hear like an echo underneath your feet. We think that's because a lot of these stalactites and stalagmites, you can see how the limestone is exposed directly overhead. We think a lot of that broke off and is now underfoot. And those pockets create that, that hollow sound. Oh. All right, we're gonna press on. And we set a trail camera right here to see what kinds of animals use the cave. It's not just bats and cave bugs and rats in here. Let's see here, let this load up. What do we have here? We have a spotted skunk deep in one of the darkest parts of the cave, probably using its nose to navigate. This is the smallest of the skunks in North America. They're about the size of a squirrel, maybe even smaller. They're actually very aggressive and brave predators. So they'll come in looking for wood rats to eat, looking for snakes, almost anything they can get their claws on. And to do a spray, the spotted skunk doesn't just lift up its tail, they do an entire handstand and they curve their backside over their head to spray anybody who's bothering them. Pretty funny. We've gotten some pictures of that on trail cameras. It's quite an acrobatic feat. All right, we're gonna take a look around here a little bit. Whereas I guess it's all pretty dark right here. All right, there's our passage going into the final. Oh no, that's where we came from. I'm gonna spin around again. We're gonna keep moving. All right, one more squeeze. And now we're in the big room. I'm gonna let this load a little bit. This is probably the biggest open space in the whole cave. It's got a real level floor, which is hard to see in this light. And you guys can see my cursor over here. That's daylight. That's the 3 foot by 4 foot natural entrance, which faces almost directly south. And so produces enough light to light this whole room up. You could get around inside this cave with only daylight. You can almost read a book in there at some times a day when the light is bright. And this is the cave that people used. This is the cave that pottery, all sorts of human artifacts were found. And of course, because a cave is kind of like a refrigerated time capsule with ultraviolet light protection, things last a long time. Native American yucca fiber sandals were found in this cave. And they were dated to be about from 400, 500 BC or AD. And looks like you could still wear them. They also found knives with wooden handles still attached. And we have a big clay oya, a vessel, which was found in the cave by Jack, which was used to store food. For my money, the most interesting thing ever found in the cave were the bones of the Shasta ground sloth. I'm kind of an 8-year-old at heart when it comes to Ice Age mammals. This is the smallest of the giant ground sloths. It's now extinct, but its remains are found in caves all over the Southwest. It's called the Shasta ground sloth. It was the smallest of the giant ground sloths, only, about 500 pounds, about 8 feet long. And they love to live in caves. Because of caves and the fact that caves have preserved so much of the bones and even mummified these animals, we know a lot about this extinct animal. There's also caves in which piles of its dung have been found. So caves have produced almost one of the more complete pictures of an extinct Ice Age animal than we would ever hope to find, including, which really blows me away, fossils of this animal, including mummies with the tissue and organs intact, have all been found in there. Our cave, we found some arm bones of the animal. I'm going to try to get them back here for display. What else we got in here? That's not so good. Okay, and this is pretty much the end of the tour. This is the back door. Boom. And that's the end of the tour. But you know what we do before we leave is I reinforce to people, the cave is a time capsule, right? You can see all these things preserved forever in the cave. And we take precautions to make sure we try to keep that quality in the cave, right? We can learn a lot from something that preserves things for 30,000 years. That's how old those sloth bones were, for instance. But outside of this time capsule is a whole nother time capsule, and that's the Mojave Desert. And I'm going to take myself off the screensaver here. The Mojave Desert is a time capsule too, because it's the most intact ecosystem in California. Almost every single plant or animal that you could find in 1491 is still out here, right? The desert has not experienced the dramatic changes that the rest of the country has until recently, and that's changing. Large scale solar and wind projects are changing vast areas of the desert. And it's really unfortunate. We have lots of animals and plants in this place. This place doesn't look like what most people would appreciate. but it's a very intact ecosystem that actually has a lot of important things to do and is really a fun place to visit because it's not packed, because it is empty and a place for reflection. But the desert, like caves, have a PR problem, right? A lot of people think caves, it's just a big hole in the ground, nothing of interest, nothing alive. The same thing with the desert. It's a flat, empty wasteland. And there's really nothing, we might as well utilize it for something. And I hope you guys will take that message with you. The desert is a really vibrant, alive place. It's a great place to visit, except maybe in summer. And I think if you come out this way, I'd love to have you into the caves. You'll learn a whole new appreciation for some of America's arid places when you can see what these areas are like, and really get to know them a little bit. And with that, that's my soapbox message to finish this up. Care about your deserts need you. With that, I'd be happy to take some questions. Thank you guys for bearing with me with some of that lag issue we had. Does anybody have any questions? I think hand raise, we can do it that way, or unmute.
Does anybody have any questions?
I answered everyone's questions. That's impressive. I think Mary, I see Mary there.
So how brittle are the stalactites? If you had a small one the size of your little finger, could you just break it off?
You know, that one I showed in the close-up picture that was kind of weirdly curved, that I think you could break with your hand. But most of the big ones, you know, I think, so originally stalactites start off as what's called a soda straw, and it's aptly named. It's hollow in the inside, and those are really easy to break, I think. I've never actually tried, to be honest, but I know that people use hammers for the ones that are thicker. I'm going to show you guys. I have a stalactite here that's been cut and polished, and it's really surprisingly heavy. It's much heavier than it looks. So this stuff is dense. One of the reasons caves tend to stay intact is that this stuff is like a thick candy shell, like an M&M has, except it's reversed. The chocolate's on the outside, there's air in the middle, and it's protected by this thick, durable, and flexible calcium carbonate. This stuff is pretty tough, very heavy, and tends to help keep caves cohesive. So it's not easy to break at all. Great question. Any others?
And you can unmute yourself if you have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
I see Judy.
Yes. How many feet is the interior end to end on the trail inside the cave?
Oh man, you know, it's very three-dimensional, but like if we were to draw a straight line on a trail through there, it's under a 1/4 mile. And that's between two caves with the man-made tunnel. In the past, this cave, Mitchell Caverns, has been referred to as like the perfect show cave. Sounds like a Price is Right thing. But show cave is like an easily accessible, highly decorated, not dangerous cave. And our cave has that for sure. For how small it is and how close and it is to the natural entrances, it's actually incredibly highly decorated, as you saw. But it's not a particularly big cave at all. There are other backcountry caves here, which are much more significant and very technical. I'm talking like rappelling and climbing to get in and out of, but not our cave, not Mitchell Caverns.
Thank you.
Yeah, maybe if you wanted a number for feet, maybe 1,000 feet.
Okay.
Good questions. Keep them coming. Put me through my paces. With COVID, I was on lockdown. I'm a little rusty.
Oh, I have another question.
Sure, Mary.
Toward the end of the tour, right after, toward the end of the tour, off to the left, it looked like there was a stalagmite that was black that that was sitting up on a stalk. So I'm wondering if you know what I'm talking about and if you can tell me how that formed, because it wasn't just an icicle dripping and it wasn't a mountain coming up from the bottom. The bottom of it actually went in and then it sat up on a stem.
Well, that's a great question. I'm not sure about that one in particular, but you probably noticed that there are like ledges on a lot of them, right? It's almost like a shelf comes out. Some of that seems to be from when there were, caves are always filled with mystery, right? And we never really know. But I think a lot of that comes from when there was standing water in the cave.
That explains
Right?
it.
So,
Okay.
yeah, when there's standing water, minerals tend to accumulate on the side. So these shelves like come out. And then as that would drop. So one thing about Mitchell Caverns is that it's so old, there's probably multiple stages of creation of formations, their weathering, and then formations on top of those. Does that make sense?
Yeah, got it. Thank you.
Puzzle in there. Absolutely. You know, another interesting thing that I didn't really get to about caves, but you probably saw a little bit of it or garnered a little bit of it in my talk, is how much cave management and science has changed and continues to change. You know, back in the day, people were very cavalier about breaking stuff and making the human route easier, or even selling stalactites. State parks never did that, but you know, people didn't really appreciate how long it took for these things to form. And they didn't really understand how much damage they did to things they didn't even understand as they put that concrete through the cave. Not until the 1990s or so did anybody realize that those two little endemic life forms, those little insects, are found in this cave and nowhere else. So they weren't even making those calculations as they developed the cave. The wind tunnel, right? When they connected the two tunnels, which is really a fun way to tour the cave, but created a problem we never foresaw. We've since rectified it. Another thing that's interesting that's changed about caves recently is Carlsbad and Karchner are the two I'm most familiar with. But caves have been doing research not just on their little invertebrate life, right? Little bugs and insects. They've actually been looking at the bacteriological realm of caves, and the numbers are insane. There, I think if I remember the numbers from the cave manager at Carlsbad, he said there's 20,000+ unique, 20,000+ species of bacteria, right? Or types of bacteria found in Carlsbad Caverns, 20,000. And of those, a huge amount of them are endemic. They are only found there and nowhere else in the world. And that was a kind of a light bulb went off in a lot of people's heads when they did that kind of research, because what is this bacteria living on? Well, apparently the bacteria is living on the calcium and carbon as it's deposited by water, which is crazy. And in the words of the cave manager from Carlsbad, he said, it's almost like we've gone back to medieval thought about caves. The ancient Greeks, you know, the earliest Western natural philosophers, they thought cave formations like stalactites, they thought they were organic. It's some sort of rock that grows, right? It's alive in a way we don't really understand. Age of Enlightenment comes up, geology is born, and then cave formations were thought of being purely geological. That is, it's just water depositing minerals. Now it's somewhere in between, because these formations may actually, part of their structure and the way they're formed might actually be the result of bacteria processing calcium and carbon from the water, which is pretty amazing. And I mean, and 10, 15 years ago, I don't think anybody had any idea that that was such a factor. And there's more research coming out about it all the time. That's one of my favorite parts about, when you work in a cave for 8 years, you got to find new things to be interested in to keep it all fresh. And that's the thing I've been most interested in lately. That whole microscopic microorganism realm of caves is probably going to get really interesting. I hope we can do some studies in our caves in the future. More questions? This is kind of the highlight of my work week, so keep them coming. Judy's got a question?
Yeah, what kind of snakes are you likely to encounter in the caves?
Great question. I wish I had I had to use a laptop. I don't have all my files. I wish I had I could show you photos. If you go into that Matterport tour, you can see yourself some of the pictures of snakes in the cave. But we tend to see two types of snakes in the cave: speckled rattlesnakes in that last big room. A couple of times we've run into them on tours. Like the desert snake, rattlesnakes have a bad rap, right? They're actually very polite. In most places in the world, venomous snakes don't warn you they're around. We're very nice, very lucky to have such nice neighbors, because they'll rattle when they want to let you know to stay away. We've had a couple times where one time we actually interrupted a rattlesnake on tour that had just finished defecating and urinating. And that's really a rare thing for a snake to do. They don't do it very often. They only really need to eat once a month. And because they're so adapted to saving water, their waste was, there was a pile of yellow crystals on top of the snake's feces. And that's its urine. That's its uric acid, its uric crystals. I've never seen it, I'd heard about it. I finally got to see it. The snake was very upset with us for being disturbed. I don't really blame him. It was intentional. So he rattled at us. Everybody got to see on the tour that the snake didn't attack you. It didn't want anything to do with us. They actually also will hibernate in that part of the cave. Speckled rattlesnakes love that Tacopa part of the cave. The second species we see in there, and usually much more active, are gopher snakes, which are common throughout, I think, the whole United States. They're big, they can get very long, very versatile snakes, really smart. In my experience, just seeing them around and the kind of things they can navigate around here. Very interesting animals. I've seen them in the dead of night cruising through, right, maneuvering all through the darkest parts of the cave with no lights on, using just their heat sensing pits and their tongue. Their tongue is kind of like their nose, right? They can sense chemicals with it. And they were just cruising through, I'm sure, looking for something to hunt. I think some of the gopher snakes may also use other parts of the cave to hibernate in as well. But the cave gets a lot of action. Luckily, we've never had too scary of an encounter with a snake in the cave. I have heard them rattling in there, but so far, so good.
Thank you.
In the same realm, Judy, as another reptile we see, which I was really surprised, is we see chuckwallas, which are really big. It's the second biggest lizard in the United States. Chuckwallas come into the cave, and we've observed them licking the cave formations, which I don't know is a way to, usually it's in the spring when we see this, if that's a way to increase the minerals or salts in their diet, because if they're licking cave formations, they're probably getting salt, calcium, maybe iron. But that's that one kind of boggled some of the biologists who saw it. That's not a very common behavior by those animals at all.
Okay,
Good question.
thank you.
All right, next up, keep coming. That might be it for us today, huh?
That's it.
I'd encourage everybody, if you want to see more of that tour yourself, just Google Providence Mountains State Recreation Area. and there'll be a parks.ca.gov. That's the official state park page. That that will have links to our YouTube channel. We've made lots of park movies, wildlife movies here. The wildlife, as I said, is very incredible here, and I got the videos to prove it. We have our Facebook page, and of course that 3D tour is linked there too. So go check it out, especially if you like wildlife animal movies. I think our movies here are pretty good.
All right. Thank you, Andrew. Oh, I really thank you for a great tour.
Sure.
I don't know how many of us will be able to make it out there sometime since it's so remote, but it was wonderful. Thank you very much. I'm sure everyone
Thank
enjoyed
you.
it.
I'm glad it all worked out. You guys were a
Yeah,
lovely
really.
group of people.